we're trying this again. I think it's going to connect. Just going to give it a few seconds. In the meantime, as this is rolling, because it doesn't show me until it officially goes live, I hope you're all having a great day. Let me just wait. Squeeze a bit slower with Facebook. Oh man. Okay. I think I'm live. Okay, guys, I'm live there. Perfect. Facebook is finally connected. Okay. Sorry about that slight delay. We'll just connect it to Instagram as well here and we'll get started. Okay. Perfect. We are live on all the platforms, or at least it looks like it. I hope you're all having a great day so far and a fantastic week. And really glad if you're able to join in live today because this topic is something that I think is massively underrated and underestimated. And I just want to start this off. If you are joining in live, if you're watching on Instagram and you see me looking this way, it's because I'm live on other platforms and vice versa. For those of you watching on the other platforms, if you see me looking this way, it's because I'm paying attention to those who are tuning in on Instagram. So I want to just start this training, this live first by describing two women. So, and I want you, as I'm describing them, I want you to think about which one you recognize for yourself. So the first woman is somebody who swears that she sleeps fine. You know, she's getting 7 to 8 hours most night. No problem falling asleep. But then she wakes up between 2 to 4 a.m. Just mind racing, just feeling wide awake, and then finally falls back asleep. But just for enough time before her alarm goes off, and then feels like she could be sleeping or getting her best sleep, in the earlier morning before as her alarm goes off. And she just kind of writes it off as stress, right? She thinks it's just stress. My, life is busy. There's a lot on my mind, or just getting older. But her body, this female is also noticing her body changing in ways that she doesn't want, right? Despite the effort that she's putting in. So that's scenario number one. Now, scenario number two is the second woman who knows her sleep isn't good, right? She's busy. She's running, a career. She's managing a household. She's carrying everybody else's priorities. And sleep is the main thing that gets cut because she's up late or she's up early. She's running on less sleep than she actually needs. And she's just told herself that she's always functioned fine on it. And that's just the case because that's what needs to get done. So this situation in particular, this woman starts to notice like her cravings start to go out of control, right? Her energy is crashing, especially later in the afternoon. And no matter what she's doing with her food or with her training, her body composition just isn't budging, right? And it's just not shifting. So these are two different situations, right? But there's one thing that they have in common, and that's both of these women, right, or these fake women I'm talking about, both of them, they have bodies that are operating in a state of chronic sleep disruption, right, or deprivation. And that disruption is directly affecting their hormones. It's directly affecting their metabolism, their body composition, their ability to get results from everything else that they may be doing. So this is where today in this talk, we're going to talk about like sleep is not a lifestyle choice, especially for women, and especially if you're somebody who is navigating the hormonal changes. You're going through perimenopause, you're postmenopausal. It's literally a biological requirement. Recovery needs change during this transition. And today I want to talk exactly about that because that is the main thing that I notice with a lot of the women that I speak to is just that they're in this state of under recovery, right? And sleep is obviously something that does get affected with the hormonal changes, which I'll talk about here too. But I want to dive into this because there's a lot that's in your control. And it's not about relying on a bunch of supplements and things like that. Those things can help, but it's about giving your body the right environment to be able to recover properly and help with sleep. So there's key things I'm going to be at first. I like to dive into like the overall big picture, what's going on, just because when you understand the why of what's happening, it allows you to just feel more empowered about what's going on and how to go about those changes. And then I'm going to dive into specific things that we implement with the women that we work with to help with sleep, to help with overall recovery, and so forth. So quick intro too, if any of you are tuning in for the first time, if you're new to my page, wherever you're watching, I'm Alexis Drillau. I'm a biologist and founder of Flexus Fitness. And I've spent over the last over 10 years now, over a decade, working with high performing women who are doing everything right, checking off all the boxes, right, and still not getting the results that they deserve. So sleep, and again, sleep and recovery, specifically what happens when things start to change hormonally, that is the one thing that gets disrupted. And it's one of the consistently missed pieces of that overall puzzle that we dive into. So let's get into it. So the first thing is what is sleep? What is it actually doing when you're unconscious, right? So before we get into like the connections, especially with hormones and all that, I just want to reframe what sleep actually is, because most women just think of sleep as rest. It's downtime. It's the absence of activity, right? But sleep is one of the most metabolically and hormonally active periods of your day. So while you're sleeping, your body is releasing growth hormone, first off, which that is very, very key to drive muscle repair, also just fat metabolism. Another thing too that's happening while you're sleeping is your cortisol rhythm is resetting. So we have our cortisol rhythm throughout the day, right? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about cortisol, the stress hormone, and oftentimes it's the villain, but we have a cortisol rhythm throughout the day. Some points of the day, cortisol needs to be high. Other points, it should be lower. But all to say, when you're sleeping, it helps to reset that rhythm. So that way, the next day when you start your day, your stress response is properly, calibrated rather than, seriously elevated. Another thing too that happens while you're sleeping is your hunger hormones. So sleep helps to regulate your hunger hormones. So this way, your appetite, your cravings for the next day are regulated, right? And it's not governed by like willpower. It's, you feel okay because you've regulated the hormones throughout the night. Another thing too is insulin sensitivity. So this is something that does change how your body is able to like metabolize sugars, carbs, all that does change throughout the menopausal transition. And a big thing when you're sleeping is it helps to maintain your insulin sensitivity so that your cells can respond appropriately to glucose, to sugars, the next morning, the next day. And another thing too, and this is the biggest one for a lot of the high performing women that we work with, is sleep is really, really key to just consolidate memory, right? And just to clear metabolic waste and recalibrating your cognitive, baseline and your emotional baseline, which do get impacted throughout the menopause transition as well. So all of this happens during sleep. And when sleep gets disrupted, all this, gets compromised. And I share all of this because I want to show you that sleep is one of the most, again, hormonally productive periods of your day, right? So a lot of people focus on like what they're doing throughout the day. First off, what you're doing throughout the day also affects your sleep at night, which we'll talk about in a bit. But they kind of just brush off sleep, and I'm guilty of this too. But this is something that, as I mature as a woman, I'm starting to realize how important sleep is, right? And disrupting it doesn't just make you tired. It just undermines every other health effort that you're putting in, that you're making throughout your day. So there's 4 connections that I'm going to go over. And then before we get into like what you can do to help all this, but the first thing is, and like these connections, I want to tie them to sleep, your hormones, body composition. So the first thing is your sleep architecture. A lot of, over the years, 8 hours has become this like magic number, right? Of you should be getting at least 8 hours of sleep. And a lot of sleep advice misses this piece completely. So a lot of it is focused on like how long you sleep, right? How many hours are you getting? And it's very much about like the quality and structure of that sleep, right? So it's not just about how long you sleep, but what is the quality like, and that's what we call, as what researchers call, your sleep architecture. So sleep moves through different cycles throughout the night. If you're somebody who has focused a lot on your sleep, or you have like an Oura ring or things like that, you're tracking it, maybe a Fitbit, then you've probably heard of some of these. But basically, like, the most critical stage for body composition and hormonal health is your slow wave sleep. So that's also known as your deep sleep. And this is a stage where, again, growth hormone is secreted in its largest pulse of the entire day. That's where muscle repair happens. That's where your body does most of the physical, work, right? Just to restore things. The second critical stage for sleep is your REM sleep. So rapid eye movement sleep. So this is where, cortisol is being regulated, emotional processing, the cognitive restoration happens, where your brain starts to recalibrate, for the next day. So that sleep, and REM sleep, is one that we hear about very often, right? So this is where it gets interesting, because somebody could be sleeping for 8 hours, and get very little of each of those stages. And there's a lot of things that can impact that. And again, a lot of these things are lifestyle related or hormone changes, because it's changing how your body's responding. But alcohol, first of all, disrupts the slow wave sleep. And I'm not saying not to drink alcohol, but I'm going to talk about this in a bit, how to go about it so it doesn't impact so much. High stress, right, can disrupt your REM sleep. A warm sleep environment can disrupt both of those stages. And the result is 8 hours of sleep, right, starts to feel like 5, right? Because physiologically your body has barely recovered. So this is where, throughout menopause and in perimenopause, when you're starting that menopausal transition, as estrogen and progesterone start to fluctuate wildly, the architecture of sleep changes before the duration does. And the first stage of sleep tends to be disrupted, and that's the slow wave sleep. So that's the one that like gets disrupted the most. And the reason why is, for a lot of women, they start to experience like night sweats, which could disrupt slow wave cycles. The classic 2 to 4 a.m. wake up, if you notice yourself waking up at 2 or 4 a.m., that's typically linked to a cortisol spike, which can be impacted by your blood sugar throughout the day, which can be impacted by how you're eating throughout the day. So we're going to get into this in a bit. But basically, since your stress response, and I actually did training on this a couple weeks ago, but since your stress response is less buffered by estrogen, it starts to fire too early in the night. And this is the most frustrating part for so many women during this stage, because they could be in bed for 8 hours, but their body is just getting a fraction of the deep restoration that it needs, right? And this is why so many women, throughout the perimenopause, throughout the menopausal transition in general, feel exhausted despite thinking that they're sleeping enough hours. So 8 hours of sleep, and especially if it's disrupted, isn't the same as 8 hours of recovery, right? So the stage of sleep matters more. It matters just as much as the duration of sleep. And perimenopause, again, directly disrupts that the most restorative stages first. Now, the second thing, so that's the first thing, and how the hormonal changes can impact all this. And again, we're going to get into it in a bit of how you could go about this to help with all this. But the second thing is your cortisol rhythm. So like I just talked about before, your cortisol follows a daily rhythm. Okay. So it's supposed to be at its lowest point late at night. And it's supposed to, and then also in the early hours of sleep, and then it's supposed to rise gradually towards the morning. And it peaks just before you wake up. And that's what gets us out of bed. That's what gives you energy. That's what gives you alertness for the day. That's like the ideal cortisol pattern. Now, when sleep is disrupted, either in timing, duration, or the quality of sleep, that rhythm starts to break down, right? So cortisol starts to spike at the wrong times. It might stay elevated into the night, right? When it should be dropping, when it should be declining. And then when you wake up, instead of, cortisol rising to get you out of bed and energize you, you start the day either in like a very stressed state or kind of like just dragging yourself, or like it's tough to get going. So a body that, and like at the end of the day too, like a body that's in that state, right, primed to hold on to fat, right? Resist muscle building, crave higher sugar, higher fat foods, like food to get energy, right? And overall, that affects other health inputs, right? Decisions around other health inputs that you're making, your food, your training, your overall recovery. So that impacts you all day long, right? Before you've even made one conscious choice. So this is why sleep timing really matters. And this is one of the simplest things. Like if you are noticing that the wake ups or just like finding yourself feeling just really tired first thing in the morning and dragging yourself, if you're not already doing this, let's say you're going to bed consistently late, even if you sleep the same amount of hours, so the same number of hours, that shifts your cortisol rhythm in ways that compound over time. So if you've been doing this for a while, again, it's not going to be like, oh, I did this for a week and everything's fixed, right? If you've been doing this for years, you've been going to bed late, and that's going to shift the rhythm over time. And your body is not designed to restore itself the same way at 1 a.m. than it is at 10 p.m. So that circadian timing of your sleep is, again, it's like one of the non-negotiables. Like it's like, and I know for a lot of women, like working late, again, I'm like human. This is me. Literally, like I have to be very intentional about this. It's a work in progress, but working late, or if you have younger kids, you're doing stuff, like it's hard to get to bed early. But as much as possible, shifting it a bit earlier, going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time, even during weekends, that is a little tweak that makes a huge difference to get your body on that rhythm. Now, again, throughout the menopause transition, estrogen and progesterone both help regulate your HPA axis. So that's what helps like keep cortisol on that rhythm. It helps keep it, calibrated. And as they start to fluctuate during perimenopause, that regulation starts to weaken. So your HPA axis becomes hypersensitive. Your stress response becomes hypersensitive. Cortisol starts to spike at wrong times, including at the middle of the night, which is why most women do wake up between 2 and 4 a.m. So it's not stress. It is because there is this like cortisol dysregulation event going on. And a big part of that is due to your body having trouble buffering the stress like it once used to. So that means your next day's stress buffer is already depleted before the day starts. So when it comes to all this, it doesn't mean that your body is doomed, right? Like, again, I'm saying like, okay, it's because of the hormones. A lot of them like, oh, it's just going to be because of the hormones. Absolutely not. It doesn't mean that your body is doomed because it's going through these hormone changes and your buffer for stress shrinkens. Shrinks. I don't know where that came out from, but anyways, your buffer for stress shrinkens. I'm like, that is not a word. But anyways, it's just important to know that it's operating without the same regulation that it used to have. And this is something that's in your control. It just means that you need to take control throughout the rest of the day to help with this, right? To counteract it. So that's the second thing, is the cortisol rhythm, which we'll get to in a bit of how you go about that. The third thing is the hunger hormone connection. This is something that a lot of women I talk to go like, I used to be so much more diligent, so much more disciplined with like my appetite and with my cravings. And suddenly I'm craving like sugar. I never used to like ice cream and chocolate. Now I'm craving it, or, I'm craving more salt. And this is the one thing that is going to, if you're somebody who is experiencing this one thing is going to change everything for how you're looking at your cravings. It's not a willpower problem. It's not that you've lost willpower, discipline. Your appetite is governed by two hormones. So you've got ghrelin, which signals hunger, and then you have leptin, which signals fullness and satiety, right? So when you are well rested, these two hormones, it's easier to balance them. So ghrelin is appropriately low after you eat, so you feel satiated, and you don't feel hungry. And then leptin keeps you satisfied, so you feel satiated, and that's where appetite, cravings, all that feels manageable. Now, even after one poor night of sleep, ghrelin can spike and leptin can drop. Your body may suddenly feel hungrier. than it actually needs to be, right? Or less satisfied by the food that you're eating. And research shows that sleep deprived women consume significantly more calories the next day. And it's not because of lack of discipline. Again, it's because their appetite, it's literally biology, their appetite hormones are just actively driving them to eat more or eat differently. So these foods, and like a lot of times too, when you feel that way, like let's face it, your brain isn't craving vegetables, right? Like it's craving higher sugar, higher carb foods for that instant energy because it needs energy, right? So um, it's trying to compensate for that restoration that it didn't get overnight. So the woman who's trying to white knuckle her way through nutrition, fighting, cravings every afternoon, struggling to stay consistent with her food, typically doesn't have a discipline problem at all. A lot of times when I talk to women like this and they're like, oh, like I just need to be more disciplined. Like I just need to put a hard stop. I just need to follow like a strict plan. I just need to like track every little thing and just tell myself no. That might work for a couple of days, but then you're going to keep falling back because you're not solving the underlying system, which is your recovery, right? So oftentimes what we see is a sleep problem, under recovery problem, under fueling problem, because those two go hand in hand. And that is chemically driving her appetite, right? And it's driving her appetite in a direction that she can't just override with willpower. So this is the other thing to consider during perimenopause and the menopausal transition is leptin sensitivity also declines as estrogen drops, meaning perimenopausal women are already more prone to leptin resistance regarding their sleep, meaning like not feeling satiated, right? Or so poor sleep just like compounds this significantly, and the result is a woman whose fullness signals are just blunted, right? And maybe her hunger signals are amplified, and feeling like she's just fighting her biology every single time she eats because she's trying to manage her food intake without addressing the sleep and the under recovery part of it, right? So I share this because it's so important to recognize that cravings aren't a character flaw, and they're often a hormonal output, right? And when sleep is chronically disrupted, or you're under eating at different parts of the day, or you're under recovering due to lack of sleep, or overall lack of proper fuel, then your hunger hormones are going to chemically drive you towards the exact foods that you're trying not to eat, right? So again, fix the sleep, fix the recovery, and you're changing the chemistry, and the cravings do follow. Now, the last point, and then we're going to get into the specific things that you could focus on. So the one thing that sleep deprivation also mimics is insulin resistance. And this is where I'm going to tie it to just like the metabolic connection. And this is the one that most women have never heard. So, and it also explains to a lot of women why body composition can just feel more stubborn, right? It can feel more stubborn to lose the fat, to build muscle, even despite your nutrition, your training being good, looking good on paper. So after just 1 week of sleeping less than 6 hours a night, healthy adults show measurable changes in their insulin sensitivity, and that mirrors early insulin, early stage insulin resistance. So meaning like their cells become less responsive to insulin. So blood sugar regulation throughout the day becomes less efficient. The body, and what that translates to is like the body becomes more, it starts to store more of what you're eating as fat, particularly around the midsection, rather than using it for energy or muscle repair. So in other words, poor sleep, under recovery, all that makes your body behave metabolically as if it has a condition it doesn't actually have. So, and if that sleep disruption is chronic, which for many busy, high performing, high achieving women it is, then the metabolic consequences accumulate quietly over time. And this doesn't just affect, look and how you feel in your clothes, but it affects your health internally. So it makes fat loss harder. It makes muscle building harder. It makes the body just feel stuck in a way that no amount of dietary changes seem to be able to fix. And that's the lever that we really focus on when we're working one-on-one with the women that we work with is the blood sugar control, all of that, the stress response. These are levers that we pull. It's not just about calories in, calories out, but it's how you're feeling throughout the day, to allow for proper sleep, proper recovery. Because if we don't improve those underlying systems, then nothing else is going to change. So, and just to keep in mind too, if you are postmenopausal, if you're going through perimenopause, the menopausal transition, insulin sensitivity already declines naturally as estrogen starts to drop. So if you're throwing in chronic sleep disruption on top of that, then that just compounds the metabolic impact, right? So this is one of the key reasons why so many women experience these rapid changes in terms of their body composition, even when their habits don't change, because the hormonal shifts are changing your metabolism, what's happening metabolically, and then layer on the sleep disruption, and that just accelerates all these metabolic changes, right? And that the hormonal shifts are already causing. And poor sleep just makes the metabolism behave as if you have insulin resistance, even if you don't. So in perimenopause, again, when like that insulin sensitivity is already declining, that just like the chronic sleep disruption just compounds that effect dramatically. So all to say, like, again, your body composition isn't resistant to change. It's responding rationally to the biological changes that are happening, and to a sleep deficit you may not even realize that you have. So all to say, I like to point out those four connections because these are things that a lot of women don't like, they feel is happening, but they don't relate it back to like, okay, this is biology. This is what's supposed to happen at this time. And now, as always, I like to talk about how can you take control of that, right? Because it's not just something that's happening to you. It is a part of the menopausal transition. But there are things that there are inputs that can help restore how your body, how things are communicating, right? The environment inside your body. So this is the part that I really want you to take with you, because understanding the problem is only half of it. Taking agency and control over what you can do is always the biggest piece. So first thing is, if it's not already clear, I think this whole talk, I've kind of repeated this, but please protect your sleep window as much as possible. So consistency of sleep timing is one of the most powerful inputs that you can have for your cortisol rhythm. So again, going to bed, waking up at the same time every day, including on weekends, that just helps keep your HPA axis calibrated, and your body just starts to anticipate that rhythm. So it starts to prepare accordingly. And that single habit has more impact on cortisol regulation than most supplements on the market. And it's very simple. Like, it is hard to do at the beginning, especially if you have to be, you got to tell yourself, okay, I'm putting my laptop away, I'm putting my phone away, I'm not working, or whatever the case, I'm respecting this. But protect your sleep window. That is the first place to start. And keep in mind, it does take some time. It's not going to happen immediately, but this is something over time absolutely compounds and affects the whole cortisol rhythm. The second thing is cooling your sleep environment. So, and that's something that you could do, temperature wise, but you can also help your body bring your core temperature down. So there's a few things here. And these are, some simple things that have worked really well for the woman that we work with. So basically, like, your core body temperature needs to drop to initiate and maintain that deep, slow wave sleep cycle. So if you're sleeping in a room in an environment that's too warm, especially if you're having night sweats, that's directly going to interrupt the stage where, like we talked about before, where growth hormone is released, that physical restoration happens. So these are just a few things that you could do to just help bring down that core temperature. So first off, obvious one, you've heard it everywhere, I'm sure, but keep your room cool and dark, right? So you want to aim for anywhere between 65 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, if you think in terms of Celsius. You want breathable bedding, right? So bamboo or linen sheets. They also have cooling mattress pads, right? Those do make a difference, especially if night sweats are a factor. Another thing too is and it sounds counterintuitive, but a warm shower or bath 60 and 90 minutes before bedtime. You could incorporate this as part of your bedtime routine. And I know it sounds super counterintuitive, but it works. As long as it's 60, like you don't want to do it like right before bed. So like give your body time to bring that to regulate, to self-regulate. So that's why I'm saying 60 and 90 minutes before bed. So the warm temperature, the warm water temperature helps to raise your surface temperature. And when you get out, your body rapidly tries to like dissipate that heat. So that causes the drop in core temperature. And that's again, a powerful onset, like a trigger to onset your sleep cycle. So that is a big one. Another one is magnesium before bed. And this is where it's worth knowing the difference between magnesiums. This is something whenever I'm talking to a woman for the first time and I ask them, they're like, yeah, I'm doing magnesium. I'm not really feeling any much of a difference. And I ask them which form of magnesium. And oftentimes they're like, I don't know, is this supplement? It has like a bunch of different magnesiums in them. And then I have them look at the label. And sometimes the label doesn't even break down what type of magnesium is in it, which oftentimes it's probably going to be like magnesium oxide, which doesn't do much. And it's a cheaper form. Or it's just like the wrong one, right? So this is where magnesium glycinate is the one to reach for if your biggest issue is falling asleep, just staying relaxed, managing cortisol overnight, because magnesium glycinate helps to calm your nervous system. It helps lower core body temperature. In general, it's very well tolerated digestively. Now, there's also magnesium threonate, so that's a different form. And this one is specifically designed to cross the blood-brain barrier better. So if you're dealing with like a lot of brain fog, like poor REM sleep, or you're just waking up feeling very like your cognition, like you're very flat, even after a full night's of rest, then threonate is a one that addresses more like the neurological side of things. For a lot of women that we work with, we tend to like both have a role. For some women. It really depends. Of course, there's other supplements too that we layer in depending. But I really look at supplements at the tip of the pyramid. The foundational things need to be in place first, but magnesium is one that I would suggest for most people out there. We're typically deficient in it. And again, for especially with hormonal changes, all this, like it just helps overall to, and that's where like for a lot of women we work with, we mix the two, or, we look at both, but, glycinate, think of it more like as for the body and threonate for the brain, right? So not all magnesiums are equal, right? If you're taking magnesium citrate, then that's going to make, if you're constipated, right? There's a bunch of different magnesiums. So depending on which form, which brand, which quality, it's important to vet. If you have any questions about that, like let me know, because I'm very strict about supplements and vetting them, etc. So happy to help. And one of the simplest ones too is just to help with body temperature throughout the night is leaving your feet uncovered. So just leaving your feet uncovered, using a fan, of course, that's obvious, but your hands and feet are key heat dissipation zones. So like that's just like allows heat to escape through your extremities, which helps lower your core temperature faster than almost anything else. So that's in terms of lowering the core temperature. Now, some other things is if you do drink alcohol, again, nothing wrong with it, but just keep in mind that alcohol, first of all, as you're going through hormonal changes, if you haven't already started noticing it, like your body doesn't metabolize alcohol the same way as it used to. In general, you want to avoid alcohol within 3 hours of sleep. So alcohol could feel like it may help you fall asleep faster, but it fragments slow wave sleep significantly. So that's why like for the deep restoration that your body needs, that's one of the first things that alcohol disrupts. And that one drink close to bedtime can really reduce that slow wave sleep stage by up to 20%. So for women in perimenopause, postmenopause, like and beyond, this is a meaningful trade-off worth understanding. You could still have the alcohol, but it's just a matter of when you're having it. And two more things to help too is this is the biggest one. I talk to so many women, and when they're struggling with body composition, when they're struggling with sleep, with recovery, all that, and I ask them what a typical day of eating looks like, oftentimes they're not fueling adequately throughout the day. And I'm not talking about like what you're eating, how much you're eating, but more about like the patterns of what you're eating, like how you're eating throughout the day. So under eating throughout the day can really, and later on into the evening too, can really elevate your cortisol overnight. So a small amount of protein, complex carbs in the evening, so like one thing throughout the day, like eating normally is one thing. But for a lot of women that we work with, even adding a little bedtime snack helps tremendously. And it would be like a little amount of protein, some complex carbs, that helps to serotonin production, melatonin production, stabilizes your blood sugar throughout the night, reduces that cortisol spike that could wake women up between 2 and 4 a.m. So even a small bedtime snack is something that we focus on as a game changer for so many women that we work with. Again, not everybody, but for some of them that we implant that for. And I know that runs, counter to what you hear out there, right? When it was most of what diet culture tells us women. But this is a big thing. In perimenopause, if there's one thing that I could say is it's not about eat less, move more. It's about fueling better, right? And giving your body the opportunity to use that fuel better. So this is where, like, for so many women that we work with, it's been engraved in their heads of like, oh, like I can't eat before bed. I can't eat past dinner. I can't, I got to watch my carbs. I got to watch all this. And it's just rewiring all that to make sure that you are giving your body the fuel it needs, because stress response changes and all these things change. Now, the last thing too is when it comes to training, and of course, like the type of training you do, all these things matter, right? But if there was one thing that I could say is if you can train earlier on in the day, if it's like an intense workout, pushing it earlier on in the day, if you are having trouble with sleep is ideal because high intensity effort, high intensity training later in the evening can keep cortisol elevated, can keep your core temperature elevated, both of which delay the onset of your sleep and reduce the sleep quality. So for women, especially if you're perimenopausal and beyond, if your cortisol is already dysregulated, if you're you're doing a lot of intense workouts later in the evening, that may be contributing to your sleep disruption. So morning or, early afternoon supports that natural cortisol curve, like when you do want to train. Again, and I'm not saying you shouldn't train in the evenings, but if you are struggling with sleep, this is a simple shift to help. Now, before I wrap this up, I just want to zoom out for a second because I gave you a lot of information there. And everything I just shared, the sleep timing, the environment, your sleep environment, the fueling, the training, none of these work in isolation, right? They're all part of the same system, and that system is your recovery. And that's, again, like I said at the beginning, recovery is not just about sleep. It's the full integration of how you train, how you fuel your body, how you manage stressors, how you sleep, how you give your body the right conditions it needs to actually adapt and respond. Sleep is the foundation, but it both influences and is influenced by every other piece, right? Every other input, every other signal you're giving your body throughout the day. So when your training load is too high for your recovery capacity, sleep is going to suffer. When you're under fueling, cortisol is going to rise overnight and sleep quality is going to drop. When stress, if you're going through a very stressful season in life, when that's more elevated, your nervous system isn't going to be able to downregulate enough to reach deep sleep and adapt to your training and all these things, right? So all these pieces are connected. And this is why the women who see the biggest shift in their sleep, in their body composition, their overall health, they're not just going to bed earlier, but they're the ones who really look at the full picture and start making intentional changes across all of it together, right? At the right pace, at the right, it's not, sleep is not the only lever, right? But it's often the one that unlocks everything else. But a lot of other things impact sleep, as I just mentioned with those 5 things that I said, right? So this is really what I want you to walk away with today is again, fueling, recovery, these are the main things to focus on. If your goal is to have more energy, be stronger, more vitality, just feel good in your body, these are things that you want to prioritize. It's not about adding more workouts, cutting more things out. It's about giving your body the right environment to actually adapt and respond to. And if you've noticed your body isn't responding the way that you want, despite the effort that you're putting into your food, into your training, sleep and overall recovery may be the missing lever. I'm just saying this is something that I know is for a lot of the women that come to us, that is a big piece of it. And it's not because there's something wrong with you, but because the hormonal changes that happen in your body do compromise the most restorative period of your day, which is your sleep, right? And they do compromise your stress response and your nervous system, all these things. So no amount of clean eating or hardcore workouts are going to compensate for that. And the good news is sleep is something that can be improved. There's, again, it's very individual because there's so many things that do impact it, but it is trainable. The inputs are changeable. And when you start treating sleep and recovery with the same seriousness that you are with your nutrition, with your training, your body has every reason to respond effectively. So if you're here listening and you're like, you know what, like I know my sleep is a problem, but I don't know how to fix it in the context of everything else going on in my body right now, this is exactly the kind of full picture that we do inside of our one-on-one coaching program. We look at your sleep, we look at your training, we look at your nutrition, we look at the full hormonal picture, we look at your history. You know, it's not just about where your body is now, but what have you been doing all these years leading up to it, right? All of it together, and we really figure out, again, what your body needs to actually start restoring and responding again. So if that's something that you'd like to explore, you'd like to get more guidance and support around, feel free to reach out to me directly or comment the word restore below, and I'll reach out to you personally. And we'll just have a conversation just to see where you're at with everything, what's driving things for you specifically, and whether we're the right team to help you, if and how we can help you. So let me know if you ladies have any questions about this. I'm going to check on the platforms quickly. I typically don't see the comments till after on Facebook, so I'm going to check later. But if you guys have any other questions about this, let me know, or any other trainings you want me to cover, comment below. I may already have those trainings already and I'll be able to easily tag you in them. But I hope this was helpful. I hope this was insightful. And as always, I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later. Have a great day, guys.